The desert wind carried dust and the distant rumble of engines as Sarah Martinez stumbled toward the neon glow of Devil's Den. Her legs trembled with each step, exhaustion weighing down her small frame like lead. The backpack on her shoulders felt impossibly heavy, though it contained so little. Behind her, headlights swept across the empty highway, and her heart hammered against her ribs. The biker bar stood like a fortress against the night, its weathered wooden facade illuminated by beer signs that buzzed and flickered. Motorcycles lined the front like sleeping beasts, chrome gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Through the window she could see silhouettes of large men, their laughter carrying on the wind. Sarah had been running for 3 days. 3 days since she'd discovered the truth. 3 days since her world had shattered into pieces too sharp to hold. The contents of her backpack were the only proof she had, the only thing standing between justice and the monsters who destroyed everything she'd ever known. Her vision blurred as she reached the heavy wooden door. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder behind her, their engines roaring like hungry predators. She had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. These bikers might be dangerous, but they couldn't be worse than what was chasing her. Sarah pushed through the door and stumbled into the smoky interior. Conversations died as heads turned toward her. She saw leather jackets, tattoos, and hard faces that had seen too much of the world's darkness. Her legs finally gave out, and she collapsed onto the sawdust-covered floor, clutching her backpack like a lifeline. The last thing she heard before consciousness faded was the scrape of chairs and the sound of heavy boots moving toward her. Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez looked up from his whiskey as the girl hit the floor. Around him, his brothers from the Iron Serpent's MC rose from their seats, hands instinctively moving toward concealed weapons. In their world, unexpected visitors usually meant trouble, and a scared kid stumbling into their sanctuary at midnight was definitely unexpected. Tank had been president of the Iron Serpents for 8 years, leading them through territorial wars, federal investigations, and the constant struggle to keep their brotherhood intact. At 42, his weathered face bore scars from countless fights, and his dark eyes had seen enough violence to fill several lifetimes. But something about the collapsed girl stirred an unfamiliar protective instinct. "Jesus Christ," muttered Diesel, the club's sergeant-at-arms, as he knelt beside her. "She can't be more than 16. The girl was pale, her dark hair matted with sweat and dirt. Her clothes were torn and stained, suggesting she'd been running hard for days. But it was the way she clutched that backpack that caught Tank's attention. Even unconscious, her fingers remained locked around the straps like her life depended on it. "Get her some water," Tank ordered, his voice cutting through the murmurs of his brothers. "And someone check the windows. If she's running from something, it might be following her." Snake, their prospect, peered through the blinds. 3 black SUVs just pulled into the lot, Prez. They're not moving, just sitting there with their engines running. Tank felt his jaw tighten. In his experience, people who traveled in black SUVs and waited in parking lots weren't the kind who knocked politely. They were the kind who kicked down doors and asked questions later. The girl stirred slightly, her lips moving in a whispered plea that sounded like, "Please don't let them find it." The front door of Devil's Den exploded inward with a crash that sent splinters flying across the sawdust floor. 6 men in dark suits poured through the opening, their movements precise and coordinated like a military unit. The lead man was tall and thin, with cold blue eyes that swept the room like a predator cataloging prey. "Nobody move," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We're looking for a girl, about 16, dark hair, carrying a backpack. Hand her over and nobody gets hurt." Tank slowly stood from his chair, his massive frame casting a shadow across the bar. Around him, his brothers remained seated but alert, their hands resting casually near weapons. The Iron Serpents had faced federal raids, rival clubs, and corrupt cops, but these men felt different. Dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with badges or colors. "This is private property," Tank said, his voice steady and calm. "You got a warrant, or are you just here to redecorate my door?" The lead man smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "I'm Agent Morrison, and this is a matter of national security. The girl has something that belongs to the government, something very important." Behind the bar, Sarah began to stir, her eyelids fluttering as consciousness returned. Tank caught Diesel's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod toward the back exit. His sergeant-at-arms understood immediately, positioning himself between the girl and the intruders. "Don't see any girl here," Tank replied. "Just a bunch of guys having a quiet drink. Maybe you got the wrong bar." Morrison's smile faded. "Mr. Rodriguez, isn't it? President of the Iron Serpents Motorcycle Club. We know exactly where we are, and we know she's here. The thermal imaging from our surveillance shows a small heat signature that wasn't here an hour ago." The admission confirmed Tank's suspicions. These weren't federal agents. Real feds didn't admit to illegal surveillance so casually. Sarah's eyes opened to the sound of threatening voices and the sight of armed men standing over her. Terror flooded her system as she recognized the cold, professional demeanor of Morrison's team. These were the same people who had killed her father, who had burned down her house, who had hunted her across 3 states. She tried to scramble backward, but found herself blocked by a wall of leather and muscle. The bikers had formed a protective circle around her, their faces grim with determination. The man they called Tank stepped forward, placing himself directly between Sarah and Morrison. "Like I said," Tank repeated, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Don't see any girl here." Morrison's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Mr. Rodriguez, you're interfering with a federal investigation. Stand aside, or we'll add obstruction charges to your already impressive criminal record." "Federal investigation?" Tank laughed, but there was no humor in it. Real feds don't kick down doors without warrants. Real feds don't run thermal surveillance without probable cause. And real feds sure as hell don't threaten civilians in private establishments. Sarah watched in amazement as these hardened criminals stood their ground against trained killers. She'd spent 3 days running, hiding, sleeping in abandoned buildings and eating scraps. She'd lost everything and everyone she'd ever cared about. But now, surrounded by men who owed her nothing, she felt the first spark of hope she'd experienced since this nightmare began. Morrison's hand moved toward his jacket, but stopped when he realized that every biker in the room had made the same motion. The odds had shifted dramatically. His team might be trained, but they were outnumbered 3-1 by men who'd learned to fight in prison yards and back alleys. "This isn't over," Morrison said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "No," Tank agreed, "it's not." After Morrison and his team retreated, Tank ordered the bar locked down. Windows were covered, security cameras were activated, and armed brothers took positions at every entrance. The Iron Serpents had just declared war on forces they didn't understand, and Tank needed to know what they were fighting for. Sarah sat in a back booth, still clutching her backpack, watching these dangerous men transform their bar into a fortress. Her hands shook as she accepted a cup of coffee from a heavily tattooed biker who introduced himself as Preacher. Despite his intimidating appearance, his voice was gentle when he asked if she was hurt. "I'm okay," she whispered, though they both knew it wasn't true. "Thank you for helping me." Tank slid into the booth across from her, his dark eyes studying her face. "Those men who came looking for you, they're not federal agents. Real question is, what do you have that's worth killing for?" Sarah's grip tightened on her backpack. Inside were documents, photographs, and a flash drive containing evidence that could destroy some of the most powerful people in the country. Her father had been an investigative journalist who'd stumbled onto a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. When he tried to expose it, they'd silenced him permanently. "My father was murdered," she said, her voice barely audible. "He discovered something about weapons sales, money laundering, connections between politicians and arms dealers. He gave me this before they killed him, told me to run and never stop running until I found someone who could help." Tank leaned back, processing the implications. The Iron Serpents had their own complicated relationship with law enforcement, but they'd never been involved in anything approaching this level of conspiracy. Still, the girl was under their protection now, and that meant something. "What's your name, kid?" Sarah Martinez." "Well, Sarah Martinez, welcome to the Iron Serpents Clubhouse. You're safe here." In the privacy of Tank's office, Sarah finally opened her backpack. The contents spilled across his desk like pieces of a deadly puzzle. Bank statements showing millions in illegal transfers, photographs of government officials meeting with known arms dealers, shipping manifests for weapons that had supposedly been destroyed, and a flash drive containing recorded conversations that implicated senators, generals, and corporate executives. Tank studied the documents with growing amazement and horror. Sarah's father had uncovered a network of corruption that stretched from Washington, D.C. to international arms dealers, involving the illegal sale of military weapons to terrorist organizations and drug cartels. The profits were being laundered through a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. "Your old man was one hell of a reporter," Tank said, his voice filled with respect. "This is enough to bring down half the government." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. "He said the story was too big for traditional media, too many powerful people involved, too much money at stake. He said they'd kill anyone who tried to expose it, and he was right." The flash drive contained the most damaging evidence. Recorded phone conversations between Senator James Whitmore and arms dealer Viktor Kozlov, discussing the sale of stolen military weapons to Syrian rebels. The weapons had ended up in the hands of terrorists who'd used them to attack American soldiers. Tank felt his blood run cold. He'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before joining the Iron Serpents, and several of his brothers were veterans. The idea that American politicians were profiting from weapons that killed American soldiers made his hands shake with rage. "They killed my father because he wouldn't stop investigating," Sarah continued. "They burned our house down and made it look like an accident. I only survived because I was at school." And Tank made a decision that would change everything. "We're going to help you expose this." Tank called an emergency church meeting, gathering all patched members of the Iron Serpents in the back room of Devil's Den. The atmosphere was tense as he explained the situation, laying out the evidence Sarah had brought and the implications of protecting her. These men had sworn loyalty to each other, but this was asking them to risk everything for a stranger. Diesel spoke first, his scarred face grim. "Prez, we're talking about going up against people who can make us disappear without a trace. This ain't some rival club or corrupt cops. This is shadow government shit." "The girl's got nowhere else to go," countered Preacher, the club's chaplain and voice of conscience. "We've all got daughters, sisters, mothers. How can we turn our backs on a kid who's lost everything?" Snake, still eager to prove himself as a prospect, raised his hand. "What about the heat this brings down on the club? We got businesses to protect, families to think about." Tank understood their concerns. The Iron Serpents weren't saints, but they operated by a code that valued loyalty, protection of the innocent, and standing against oppression. The evidence Sarah carried proved that the very government that persecuted them was far more corrupt than they'd ever been. "This isn't just about the girl," Tank said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "This is about American soldiers dying because politicians sold weapons to their enemies. This is about everything we fought for being betrayed by the people who sent us to war." Wrench, the club's oldest member and a Vietnam veteran, stood slowly. "I didn't spend 2 years in the jungle so some senator could get rich selling guns to the enemy. I vote we protect the girl and help her expose these bastards." One by one, the other members voiced their agreement. The Iron Serpents had made their choice. With the club's support secured, Tank began planning their next moves. They couldn't simply hand the evidence to law enforcement. Too many agencies were compromised. Traditional media had already proven ineffective, as Sarah's father had discovered. They needed a different approach, something that would guarantee the information reached the public before it could be suppressed. Hacker, the club's tech specialist despite his intimidating nickname, studied the flash drive's contents. "This stuff is dynamite, but we need to be smart about how we release it. One leak, and they'll claim it's fake, discredit the whole thing." Sarah sat quietly in the corner, still processing the fact that these outlaws were risking everything to help her. "My father had contacts at several international news organizations. He said foreign journalists were less likely to be influenced by American political pressure." Tank nodded approvingly. "Smart man. We'll need multiple releases, different outlets, make it impossible to contain." He turned to Diesel. "What's our security situation?" "Perimeters locked down tight. Got brothers watching all approaches, and I've called in favors from allied clubs. If Morrison's people try anything, we'll see them coming." But Tank knew they couldn't stay defensive forever. Morrison and his team represented powerful interests with unlimited resources. Eventually, they'd find a way to breach the clubhouse's defenses or simply wait for the Iron Serpents to make a mistake. "We need to go on the offensive," Tank decided. "Force them to react to us instead of the other way around." The plan they developed was audacious and dangerous. They would simultaneously release the evidence to multiple international news outlets while creating enough chaos to prevent immediate retaliation. It would require splitting their forces and taking enormous risks, but it was their only chance to ensure Sarah's story reached the world. At precisely midnight, Hacker initiated the coordinated release of Sarah's evidence across multiple platforms. The documents went to journalists in London, Berlin, Tokyo, and Sydney simultaneously, along with detailed explanations of the conspiracy and the murders committed to cover it up. Within hours, the story was spreading across international news networks faster than any government agency could contain it. Sarah watched the coverage from Tank's office, tears streaming down her face as reporters detailed her father's investigation and the evidence he'd died protecting. For the first time since his murder, she felt like his sacrifice had meaning, but their victory was short-lived. Morrison's response was swift and brutal. Black SUVs surrounded Devil's Den before dawn, and this time they weren't alone. Federal agents, local police and tactical teams created a perimeter that stretched for blocks in every direction. "Iron Serpent's Motorcycle Club," Morrison's voice boomed through a megaphone. "You are harboring a fugitive wanted in connection with terrorist activities. Surrender the girl and stand down or face the consequences." Tank laughed bitterly as he watched the news coverage on his phone. Terrorist activities. They're already spinning the narrative, making her the villain. The siege had begun, but the Iron Serpents were prepared. They'd stockpiled food, water, and ammunition for exactly this scenario. Their clubhouse had been fortified over the years, with reinforced walls, multiple escape routes, and communication equipment that couldn't be easily jammed. Sarah felt the weight of guilt crushing down on her. These men were trapped because of her, facing federal charges and possible death because they'd chosen to protect her. "Maybe I should surrender," she whispered. "This isn't your fight." Tank's response was immediate and firm. "Like hell, we made this our fight the moment we decided to stand up for what's right. Your father died exposing the truth, and we're going to make sure that truth survives." The standoff stretched into its second day as news crews gathered outside the federal perimeter. Drawn by the international attention Sarah's leaked evidence was generating. The story had exploded across social media, with hashtags demanding justice for her murdered father and protection for whistleblowers trending worldwide. Inside Devil's Den, the Iron Serpents maintained their defensive positions while monitoring news coverage and government communications. Hacker had tapped into several federal frequencies, giving them advance warning of tactical movements and strategic planning. "They're getting pressure from Washington," Hacker reported. International media is calling this a cover-up, and several European governments are demanding explanations about the weapons sales. Tank felt a grim satisfaction. The evidence was having its intended effect, but he knew the government would eventually find a way to discredit or silence them. They needed to maintain public attention long enough for the truth to become undeniable. Sarah had become the symbol of resistance against corruption, her story inspiring protesters to gather in cities across the country. Young people especially had rallied to her cause, seeing her as proof that even the most powerless could stand up to systemic injustice. But Morrison wasn't giving up. Through intercepted communications, they learned he was planning a full assault under cover of darkness, using the excuse of terrorist activities to justify overwhelming force. The plan was to eliminate everyone inside the clubhouse and claim they'd been killed while resisting arrest. "They're going to try to end this tonight," Tank announced to his brothers. "Full tactical assault, no survivors. They can't let us live to contradict their narrative." The Iron Serpents began their final preparations, checking weapons and reviewing escape routes. They'd always known this life might end in violence, but they'd chosen to make their last stand matter. As darkness fell, thermal imaging revealed tactical teams moving into position around Devil's Den. Morrison had assembled an overwhelming force. Federal agents, military contractors, and local SWAT teams, all coordinated for a single devastating assault. Tank gathered his brothers in the main room, their faces grim but determined. "Gentlemen, it's been an honor riding with you. Tonight, we make sure the world remembers why we fought." Sarah stood among them, no longer the terrified girl who'd collapsed on their floor. The past few days had transformed her, showing her the power of standing up for justice even when the odds seemed impossible. "I want to fight with you," she said. "Negative," Tank replied firmly. "Your job is to survive and keep telling your father's story. We've prepared an escape route through the old mining tunnels. Preacher will get you out when the shooting starts." The assault began at 3 a.m. with flashbang grenades and breaching charges. The Iron Serpents returned fire from prepared positions, their knowledge of the building's layout giving them a temporary advantage. But they were vastly outnumbered, and everyone knew this was a delaying action rather than a winnable fight. Sarah reluctantly followed Preacher through a hidden door behind the bar, entering a network of tunnels that connected to the old copper mine outside town. As they crawled through the darkness, the sound of gunfire echoed behind them, each shot representing another brother making the ultimate sacrifice. They emerged in the desert hills overlooking Devil's Den, watching as the building burned. Sarah counted muzzle flashes and tried to track which positions were still active, praying that Tank and the others would find a way to survive. But as dawn broke over the desert, the gunfire finally stopped. Devil's Den was a smoking ruin, and the Iron Serpent's last stand was over. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood before a congressional hearing committee, her testimony being broadcast live around the world. The evidence her father had died protecting had sparked the largest government corruption scandal in American history, leading to dozens of arrests and resignations. Senator Whitmore had been indicted on charges of treason and arms trafficking. Victor Kozlov was in federal custody, his international weapons network dismantled. Morrison and his team had disappeared, their identities and agencies remaining classified, but their operation had been shut down. "The Iron Serpent's motorcycle club saved my life," Sarah testified, her voice strong and clear. "They chose to protect an innocent person rather than look the other way, and they paid the ultimate price for that choice." Naitu, the official report listed 8 Iron Serpent's members as killed during the siege, including Tank Rodriguez. But Sarah knew the truth was more complicated. Preacher had survived and disappeared into the underground network of veterans and outlaws who helped each other stay hidden from government persecution. The media had initially portrayed the Iron Serpents as dangerous criminals who'd held a minor hostage, but as more evidence emerged, public opinion shifted. They became symbols of resistance against corruption, proof that honor and courage could be found in the most unexpected places. Sarah had used the settlement money from her father's wrongful death lawsuit to establish a foundation supporting investigative journalism and whistleblower protection. She'd also quietly funded a memorial for the Iron Serpents, honoring their sacrifice with a simple plaque that read, "They stood for justice when no one else would." The truth had survived, just as Tank had promised, but the cost of that survival would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life. 2 years after the siege, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at her college dormitory. Preacher stood in her doorway, older and more weathered but unmistakably alive. Behind him was a young man she didn't recognize, wearing the colors of a motorcycle club she'd never seen before. "Thought you might want to know," Preacher said quietly. "Tank didn't die in that fire." Sarah's heart stopped. "What?" "Emergency tunnel system we never told you about. Tank and 3 others made it out, but they had to stay dead. Too much heat, too many people looking for them." Preacher gestured to his companion. "This here's Marcus Jr., Tank's son. He's starting a new chapter, different name, different purpose." The young man stepped forward, his resemblance to Tank unmistakable. "We call ourselves the Truth Riders now. We protect whistleblowers, help people like you get their stories out safely. My father wanted me to give you this." He handed Sarah a worn leather jacket with the Iron Serpent's patch carefully removed. In its place was a new patch, a phoenix rising from flames with the words "Truth Rises" embroidered beneath. "He said you earned the right to wear our colors," Marcus Jr. continued. "Said you showed more courage than most patched members he'd known." Sarah put on the jacket, feeling the weight of responsibility and honor it represented. The Iron Serpents were gone, but their legacy lived on in a new form, continuing the fight for justice and truth. "There's something else," Preacher added. "We've got word that Morrison survived too. He's working for private military contractors now, still hunting people like you. The war isn't over." Sarah nodded, understanding. She'd always known this was bigger than one conspiracy, one cover-up. But now she wasn't fighting alone. She had brothers and sisters who shared her commitment to exposing corruption and protecting the innocent. The scared girl who'd collapsed at Devil's Den was gone, replaced by a warrior for truth.